Stay tuned for another episode of the Coming Soon podcast with sPidA.
Hello, everybody. sPidA here, Coming Soon podcast, of course, coming to you once again. I'm in San Antonio, Texas. My guest, Jason Zyla. How are you doing, bro?
Hey, how's it going?
Man, it's going great, man. I'm actually on my lunch break at work. Turns out they're going to take that hour away from me, so I figure why not, get this going.
Absolutely.
But I appreciate you, man. And of course, have you here for a few reasons, man. One of them being the Dark Illusions FX, man. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I used to make Halloween masks for a living way back 25 years ago. And I did that for a while till I decided to go back to school in my 30s, which was an amazing thing in itself. But I went about 20 years without making Halloween masks. And then I got a job teaching art to a group of adults with traumatic brain injuries. And one of the things I found that they were really interested in was mask making, and it's something that I had done. And as I was teaching them how to do it, I kind of got re-interested in the whole process and wound up getting back into it. And so I rebranded as Dark Illusions 2 years ago, and I've been kind of working my way back into the business since then.
Man, and let me ask you, because obviously when it first started for you, I mean, was it in high demand back then?
Yeah, it was kind of a Wild West scene. There weren't a whole lot of people making custom Halloween masks back then. It was, I mean, if you exclude, say Distortions, which is kind of an indie place, if you exclude them, you basically had Death Studios and Dark Side Studio, and then a bunch of little guys. And so it didn't take me too long back then to become one of the bigger ones. I was never quite as big as Death Studios and Dark Side, and I'm still not. But yeah, there was nobody doing it really back then, so it was kind of wide open.
Okay, sweet, man. And of course, I mean, as far as what got you interested in doing this, I mean, did you grow up watching horror movies? Was this pretty much how it all started?
Oh yeah, I was watching horror movies for literally as long as I can remember.
Nice.
I remember seeing The Evil Dead at the drive-in
Nice.
in around 1980, 81, whenever that was. I grew up on the Universal and Hammer monster movies and Night of the Living Dead, all that kind of stuff.
Sweet, man. And of course, I mean, even back then, I mean, what did your parents say about this? I mean, were they against you watching horror films, or did they mind?
No, it was actually my mom that really kind of got me into it, because back in those days, we had 6 TV channels. We had ABC, NBC, and CBS, and then since we're on the border of Canada, we had CBC, and then 2 local UHF channels. So the UHF channels would show monster movies every Saturday or Sunday morning, and so or afternoon, and so we'd sit and watch those. And my dad was into the Universal and Hammer. He didn't really care too much about other stuff, but he was into like the old Dracula and Frankenstein and stuff like that. But it was my mom and the lady that lived across the street, and all of us kids were pretty much raised on monster movies.
Nice, bro. And I mean, of course, and I forgot to ask because you're up north, man. Where about are you at?
About 15 miles north of Detroit, maybe a
Oh,
little bit less than that. So I can pretty much see Canada from the roof of my house if I wanted to get up there.
oh man. Okay. Well, let me ask you this: because of the weather, I mean, making masks back then was that an issue?
Well, it's an issue, or it can be an issue in the winter, because mask latex will freeze, and if it freezes, it kind of turns into a foam permanently, like a hard foam, sort of like Nerf. Um,
Oh, man.
and so it can be difficult having latex shipped during the winter, or it could be 20 or 25 years ago. The last couple winters, it hasn't been getting cold up here anymore, so
Wow.
I haven't had too much trouble. Monster Makers is where everybody gets their latex from, and they're in Cleveland, and I'm in Detroit, and so we're about 300 miles apart. So it doesn't take too long to get it up here. So it doesn't really pose too much of a problem, but it was more of a problem
Back
way
back
back when
north.
it used to get cold. Yeah.
No, no, for sure, man. Because of course, I mean, for us, I mean, I am here in Texas, and I always tell people it's about like 30 miles away from the sun. You know, during the summer, it's
Yep. Uh-huh.
freaking hot as hell, man. But I've had latex masks that I sort of I would display and I would forget about, and like weeks later, I look and it's like freaking melted, man. It's just it does get that hot, especially in front of a window or. But I mean, for you guys out there, I mean, you talk about it being cold during the winter. I mean, how hot is y'all summer?
Uh, Average temperature is supposedly like 77 in July, but we have, mid 90s to low hundreds for a week or here and there during our summer. So, I mean, it's not cold by any stretch of the imagination. If you go a couple hundred miles north, like up towards Saginaw Bay in the Thumb area, it starts to be cooler in the summer there and cooler yet more as you go farther north. But we're not too far. We're only about 50 miles from Ohio, so
Oh, okay, okay.
it's not
Yeah,
that
no,
bad.
because even now, like for us, I mean, it's I think last year we had like almost like a month and a half or 2 months of 105-degree weather, man, and it was freaking it was bad. I mean, it was just like you couldn't find a shade, you know, it was just freaking insane. But you know, people keep saying like, oh, you know, you get used to it, and I mean, I've worked out in the fields, I've worked out in the the elements. I was a letter carrier for like 15 years, and so I've been
Mhm.
out there in the heat, but it's just like it just seems to be getting worse and worse, man. I ain't gonna lie.
It
Pretty bad.
does. It was 80 here yesterday, so yeah, I hear you.
Damn. Okay. So I was gonna say that's like our winter right there, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool day. But let me ask you. I mean, as far as the company itself, is this just yourself, or are you promoting other artists?
So this is me. Everything is produced here in my itty bitty little shop, about I
Yes.
don't know, 800 square feet worth of shop area, and I've got a couple hundred feet worth of wood shop area downstairs. Um, and yeah, it's me. I get my wife and kids to chip in a little bit on certain things.
Okay.
My wife is the shipping wench, and so she gets to throw things in boxes and print labels and hoof them on up to the post office. But yeah, 90% of it or more is me.
Okay, man. Well, let me ask you once again, man, because of course, when you first started doing this, I mean, even now, I mean, but back then, I mean, all the high sellers were the comments. You know, have you seen the shift? I mean, have you seen like people wanting more custom than the original, or like the actual, like Jason, or you know, those figures, those characters?
Yeah, so movie monsters still to this day sell the best. Now, back back then 20 years ago, nobody was licensing anything. Like the movie studios, Paramount was still ashamed of Friday the 13th, for instance. Like they didn't want anything to do with it. So they weren't licensing that out to anybody. And so the only place people could get replicas of them was through guys like myself and Dark Side and all of that. Now there's more licensing, but I was interested to see that even though Michael Myers has been officially licensed to Trick or Treat, which incidentally I came up at the same time as Justin, we kind of both learned the ins and outs of mask making around the same time. But now that Justin's got the full line of officially licensed Michael Myers masks, I was surprised to see that custom ones from indie mask makers still sell and there's still a demand for them and people are still paying ridiculous prices for them, like 800, $900,000. So um, apparently there's still that hunger for custom made masks, and I guess people just like variety. I've got one customer who is collecting part 8 Jason masks from like
Yeah.
every different person that he can find that makes one. And I gave him a rundown a couple weeks ago on everybody that I know of that makes or made one at some point. So, yeah, the demand is still there for the movie monsters, and originals tend not to sell very well.
No, you see, and I was gonna say too because I was talking to somebody yesterday about the posters, you know, or the signatures. You know, people go crazy over getting signatures for all the characters that play these actors
Yeah,
or these characters, you know, actors that play these characters, should I say? But I could imagine it's the same thing with Mask. You know, everybody wants a different makers just because you know everybody kind of puts their own 2 cents or their own little extra in it, man. So that's I
right.
can definitely see that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, everybody's got does the sculpts are a little bit different, the paint jobs are a little different. I tend, for instance, not to go for hyper realistic paint jobs. I do more comic book style paint jobs, so that kind of sets mine apart from some of the more realistic ones. So yeah, there's all kinds of different flavors, and people want to collect all of them, I guess.
No, yeah, yeah. It's kind of like Pokemon cards, man. You got to get them all, bro.
I guess so.
Man, well, let me ask you. Now that you mentioned also, I mean, when it comes to the paint jobs, I mean, you go a little bit different. Are you a comic book collector? I mean, is that kind of why you do this?
No, I'm not actually, but I do like the style of like the EC Comics
Okay.
monsters and stuff like that, Creep Show, and things of that nature. So I tend to go for more highly contrasted paint jobs, whereas you know a realistic paint job's not going to have shadowing on it. So
Right.
I'm gonna do the shadowing on there.
Oh,
I'm
nice.
gonna do I'm gonna do upper and lower layered coats that are contrasted to each other heavily, like not exactly black and white, but brown and skin colored or whatever to kind of bring detail out. So it's kind of like the Death Studios way
Yeah.
of doing things because a lot of us of my generation, myself and Paul Daniels and a handful of others, were kind of raised on Death Studios, and so the way Jeff did things or has been doing things for 40 years is kind of the way we kind of fell into doing it.
Yeah. No, no, I'm sure, man. And let me ask you. I mean, when you first started doing this, was there somebody that you looked up to? I mean, how did you go about learning how to mold and do everything else?
So I started off on my own. I actually got the starter kit from Monster Makers, which came with a printed, staple bound instruction book, how to. And I followed that. And unbelievably, my first two-piece mold actually came out. It worked.
Nice.
And I was scared shitless making it, but it worked. And then somewhere along the line, I met Darkside Paul in
Yep.
Chicago, and a very well-known sculptor, Jeff Wehenkel, who at the time lived, I don't know, 20, 30 miles from me in Livonia. And Jeff was a big help with me getting started. He basically gave me the molds for everything he'd ever sculpted,
Wow.
and sculpted anything I needed him to. And like by next week, like I'd call him up on Monday and say, "Hey Jeff, could you sculpt me this?" And he'd bring the sculpture up on Saturday, and we'd mold it in my garage or whatever. Um, and between those two guys, Jeff and Paul, um, really kind of gave me a lot of tips and showed me how to do this and how to do that. What's the best way to apply paints, how to compose a paint job, some sculpting tips that didn't really stick very well because I'm not the world's greatest sculptor. And then I was fortunate to be able to pass that on myself to Bill Miller, who's a mask maker, and Eric Coomer, who's down in Florida now, who does stormtrooper armor and things like that these days. So I was able to pass those skills on as they were passed to me, and it was all a pretty cool, process over a few
No,
years.
for sure, man. And let me ask you because a lot of times, I mean, you talk about your first two molds coming out great. Have you ever had any happy accidents that you kind of kept?
Happy accidents, happy you don't I don't think you have a happy accident with a mold. You can have a happy accident with a paint job, and
Okay, gotcha.
I've had that happen. Um, but if you mess up anything on a mold, you're gonna be crying for a while because they're
Oh
not,
man,
especially if it's a master mold off a clay sculpture. Because if you screw up the mold, it's gonna screw up the sculpture, and you're gonna have to resculpt it. So those you get one chance to get it right.
wow.
Making a copy mold off of a latex master, if you screw that mold up, then you just throw it out and make another one. And so I've had accidents making copy molds where something stupid happened and it didn't come out, but it's nothing really that you can turn into something that would make it happy. It's just kind of, you get a big hole in it, and so now he's got a wart on his head that he's not supposed to have.
Man, and well, let me ask you this. I mean, when that happens, what do you do with the mask or the molds in general?
So plaster, and by extension ultracal or hydrocal, or whatever it is you're using can theoretically be ground back down into powder and recycled, but I have never known anybody who's done that or even tried it. So what happens when I get a mold that's either worn out because they only last 25 or 30 castings, or
Right.
one that didn't come out at all, is you basically take a hammer to it and break it up into pieces and it goes out in the trash.
Oh man. You see, and the reason I'm asking that is because even through these, I mean, I interview actors, people that have been in big films, and we always talk about as far as opportunities to be able to keep something that just kind of didn't work. Whether it was in the film or they decided not to use it, or they used it and they just kind of threw it away. And I mean, have you ever thought about that, or are you just like, I'm making enough to where, you just keep making them?
Well, I keep a copy of everything that I make here.
Okay.
Uh, I think of it as a paint master. If I forget along the way how I painted something, or I haven't, for instance, I have to make a whole bunch of my sack head masks this week, and I haven't painted one of those in a year. So I may not remember exactly how I painted it. So I've got a paint master here, that I can
Gotcha.
pull off the shelf and say, "Oh, okay, this is how I painted it," and that way I can keep a consistency. But more or less, I'm not. What I'm doing here is not like a Hollywood makeup studio or special effects house. This is more like a manufacturing facility.
Right.
So it's like we're putting product out. Like, we're instead of stamping 400 little widgets off of a press, we're making 400 masks out of plaster molds. So
Got it.
yeah, it's more manufacturing based really than that kind of thing. It's similar but very different in
Right.
practice.
Right. No. Well, let me ask you this. I mean, earlier, once again, we talked about a lot of people not so much wanting the originals, but wanting customs. How many masks, if any, have you made for indie films?
I made two for sure
Okay.
that I'm thinking of. There was a company in Rhode Island in the early 2000s called Timberwolf Entertainment, and he was making micro budget movies in the $10,000 $15,000 range. And I made the killer's mask for a movie called Sam Hain that he made and its
Oh,
sequel.
nice.
And then I believe one of his friends made a movie, and I may have made a mask for that. I also supplied some fake blood to a couple of their productions, but that's really been my extent into movie making. If that
Right.
makes any sense.
Well, I mean, this is just the mask that you actually made for the films. Do you know of any films that decided to use one of your masks and they're kind of like, hey, we used it in the film? I mean, is that possible?
It's possible, but I don't think I've ever come across it.
Oh, okay, okay. Cool, man. Well, I mean, I'm sure, like over the years, I mean, you've gotten used to your craft. You've gotten used to work making things the way that to where they work. But
Yep.
I mean, are you still learning? I mean, what do you do about like to be able to like keep crafting your skills?
Well, yeah. So first is just practice
Yeah.
and becoming more familiar with the tools and how they react in certain ways, and YouTube is a great resource we have now that we didn't have 20 years
Oh
ago.
yeah.
And so there are thousands, if not tens of thousands of, for instance, airbrush channels on YouTube. So I can sit there and watch airbrushing. They may not be airbrushing masks, but I can still take techniques from that. And so I can watch a guy using an airbrush a certain way and say, oh, wow, I've never thought to
Nice.
try that, and that effect might work. And so then I'll try it out and it'll work or it won't. But you pick up little things like that. I haven't been back to sculpting, but I do watch sculpting videos. Casey Love for a while was doing a live stream every Monday night, and he would sculpt, he would cast, he would paint, and do like various tutorials for like 4 or 5 hours a night. Um, and I would like to watch those, see if I could pick up some tips. Um, so yeah, I mean the learning never stops, and the day you stop learning is the day you start lying to yourself, right? Because
Yeah.
you're always going to keep learning something. Old dogs are going to learn new tricks, and if they don't, they're dead.
No, yeah, I mean, 'cause I guess somewhat like technology. I always joke around and tell people like, I kind of stopped learning with the VCR. My VCR is still blinking 12. I haven't even erected that.
Right.
But yeah, I'm still learning things. When it comes to the podcast, comes to streaming, microphone different. I mean, there's so much stuff out there that you just kind of pick and choose and see what works for you and what doesn't. But I can imagine the same thing with you guys. Just being able to use. I mean, has latex changed that much throughout the years? Let me ask you that.
So years and years and years ago, there were many different kinds of latex that were, latex formulas that have been developed for masks,
Right.
but
Uh,
the uh, the one that everybody always felt was the best was a specific formula called RD407, and there was a small. It was that formula of latex was developed by Don Post way back in the 60s, and it was, I don't know if it was developed by or just owned by the small company in Illinois 20 years ago, and they were the producers of RD407 mask latex, and they were the only place you could get it. And Monster Makers had their own brand, but it was kind of plasticky or kind of more like vinyl.
right.
Um, and there were other ones that you could get from different places, but most people got theirs from. I can't even remember the name of the company. At any rate, sometime in the intervening 20 years, Monster Makers acquired that license, and so now they make RD407. Justin Mabry actually produces mask latex that is in a copycat formula of RD407, and um, I believe not Smooth On, but Reynolds Advanced Materials themselves may produce
Right.
another copycat formula that's similar. I haven't used any of those, but my understanding is that they're very similar. Um, so yeah, it's basically the same mask latex that everybody's been using since Don Post invented Halloween masks in the 60s.
Oh yeah, no, I can imagine, man. Because of course, when it comes to wanting to fix something that works, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, I'm sure, like you said, the formulas do change, for certain, you know, uh, masks. But all in all, man, I mean, it's a great stuff. I mean, I think on your website, I think you have had seen where you started in 1997. Is that when you actually officially started making them?
That's when I sold my first mask that I had
Okay.
made. But I had been making costumes. There was no such thing as cosplay in the 80s, but
Yeah.
I had been making costumes since I was as young as 5. Just kit bashing stuff together, glue foiling stuff out of trash bags and aluminum foil and paper grocery sacks and whatever I could get my hands on, crayons and colored pencils. And so I had been doing all that stuff since 1980 ish, and then golly, probably in the 90s started repainting masks that I had bought at Halloween stores. And early 90s we're talking, there still weren't any Halloween USA, Spirit Halloween. There was none of that. It was still all mom and pop stores. And so I would go to all these stores and kind of haunt them and dig through their bins and look at their racks and buy masks with us, take them home and paint them. um, Not always very successfully, because there's a specific way to paint latex to make it stick right. But yeah, I've been at it for a long, 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 long time, over 40 years. But I sold my first mask in around 97.
Oh wow, man. And also, I mean, with the name, I mean, you do have the name Jason. I mean, was ironically, was Jason like the first match you ever made?
Yes,
Oh,
absolutely. My mom and the neighbor lady across the street from our house took all of us kids to see Friday the 13th, the final chapter, at the theaters in 1984. And depending on my birthday's in July, so depending on when we went, I would have been 8 or 9 at the time. And all of us kids had seen all of the preceding Friday the 13th movies up to that point already. And I believe I've written it in the bio on my Etsy site, darkillusionsfx.com. From the moment I saw Jason's face in the seventh Friday the 13th movie, I instantly needed to have that mask. And of course, back then, and we're talking the late 80s, nobody licensed anything. So that mask was not available anywhere. And so even into the early 2000s, there was nobody producing that mask. And so I had just decided sometime in the late 90s, well, if nobody's going to make it, I'm going to have to make it myself. And that was the impetus for finding out how masks are made
Yeah,
and getting into practicing it myself. And yeah, you could say Friday the 13th was actually what kicked off the whole thing.
sweet, man. I mean, I had to ask, and of course, I mean, I'm going through your Etsy, and one of the ones that actually caught my attention was, let me see, this bad boy, Shock Monster. Tell me a little bit about that.
Shock Monster was a character created by Topstone um, decades and decades and decades ago. They're long out of business, and the original Shock Monster from Topstone was, a very very low cost, cheaply made, cheaply painted mask, but it was a character that kind of, I don't know, it just kind of stood out and caught a lot of people's imaginations, and so ever since, pretty much every mask company has done their own spin on the Shock Monster. Death Studios has got one. Um, pretty much all of them. And then so the one that's on mine is a sculpt that I got from Bill Miller, who was my former student, and
Oh,
he sculpted it up just as a face mask. And I was like, hell yeah, I'll produce that. Let's get the mold over here and we'll pour some rubber in it and see what happens. It's a fun mask. I love it.
I don't know for sure, man, because I'm going through all of them, and I'm like, wow, man. I mean, you definitely looks like you enjoy what you're doing, man, because all these masks look, hella fun. So
Oh yeah.
I can only assume. Now, let me ask you. We talked earlier as far as you growing up, as mom and dad being okay with you watching films. Your kids. I mean, how old were they when they started watching horror movies?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Right away. Basically from the second they came home, because I was doing this for a living, and so a lot of times they'd be in the shop in a playpen, what monster movies on the TV, and I'm making monsters, and the dog's laying in a puddle of spilled latex, and it was a lot of good times back then. I'd be working in a 2-car garage, and I'd have both doors run up, and the kids out there either toddling around the backyard or, like I said, playing in a playpen, depending on how old they were at the time, and had all my dogs out there, and um, yeah, it was a lot of fun. So they were watching movies, monster movies. I remember my daughter couldn't. She was like just learning to talk, so she might have been 1.5 or 2 years old, and she wanted to try to tell her mom that she wanted to watch the Jason with the fire, which
Oh
was
man,
I don't know if you remember the old DVD cover of Part 7 with the flames behind him standing on
yes,
the front. That she was trying to tell her that's the one she wanted to watch when she was like 2 years old. Um, so
man.
yeah, they grew up with it. I've got a picture of them somewhere, kind of like fighting each other in the kitchen of our old house, wearing a Michael Myers mask and a Freddy Krueger mask, and they were like, uh, I don't know, maybe 2 and 4 or
Oh
1 and 3
wow.
or something like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah.
the boy is he's Jesus, how old is he? He's 23 now, and he's pretty much only in the movies that have superheroes or robots in them. He's not smart like the rest of us. But my daughter is like all horror movies and heavy metal, and I think Art the Clown is her big hero right now.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Man, I was gonna say because I have a photo of I have two daughters, and a photo when they were maybe like man, I want to say 8 and 5, and we went to Walmart,
Uh huh.
local Walmart, and they had Jason Voorhees mask, and they both decided to put him on. I took a photo, and it was like, man, I took it and I sent it to their mom, and she's like, really, she wasn't so much against it, but it was like, she knew I was into horror, and this is my oldest right now. She's 23, youngest is 20. So it's just something that they grew up with, But I mean, I think it was one time I had my oldest wasn't feeling well, so I just picked up my youngest that weekend. I've been separated already, and
Mhm.
I took her home. We had bought pizza, and I'm like, hey, you want to watch Clifford? And she's like, no, can we watch Chucky? And I looked at her and I was like, oh my God. I was like, yeah, man, this kid.
So, yeah, so my daughter had seen literally every Friday the 13th movie by the time she was 2 years old, and so that's what she would watch instead of Elmo. She'd have Final
Yeah,
Chapter on the TV on the living room, and so when the remake came out in 2009 of Friday the 13th, she was what 9 going on 10 years old, something like that, and she insisted she wanted to go see it. And so this was her first experience in the vast difference between experiencing a movie in a theater and watching it on your own couch,
right.
because she was absolutely traumatized by it. It was hilarious.
Oh yeah, you
um,
see, and that's one of the things. I mean, because I mean, I grew up watching. I told people we didn't have cable early in the '80s, so we
right.
were watching a lot of reruns from Twilight Zone and Black and White.
Yep.
Alfred Hitchcock. And when we finally got cable, of course, we started watching all these, Elvira, Up All Night. I mean, just all these, movies that, I just went crazy. But I used to. It was we're a family of 10. We had 2 bedrooms, and
Hmm.
when I finally got smart enough to like say, you know what, I'm just going to sleep on the couch. Like everybody was okay with it, and I picked it because I used to stay up and watch TV like late.
Hmm.
So that was my kind of like my excuse. So I'm in the living room watching TV, and it just became a thing. But yeah, it's just, I mean, it was everything about it that I enjoyed. The artistic background when it came to the storylines. I mean, everything. The mask, of course.
Of course.
Yeah, but it's just, I mean, it's something that's gonna keep going. I mean, once my kids, I do become a grandpa, and I have grandkids, then who knows, man? Maybe I'll have them even earlier.
As socially maladjusted as mine
Yeah.
are, I don't think I'm ever going to have any grandchildren. But
Oh,
oh man, I really missed out on a lot of that, because even into the '90s, Detroit did not have cable. I grew up in the city. Believe it or not, and I'm not name dropping because I've never met him, but I grew up like 4 blocks away from Eminem,
oh,
and
nice.
so we lived 4 blocks apart, and I went to the private schools and he went to the public schools, so we never met. And
Okay.
he's a few years older than I am, but anyway, the city of Detroit had no cable until sometime in the early '90s, when Don Barton, who was a big entrepreneur in Detroit, started in Detroit and then in Las Vegas. Um, he started a cable company there, and I remember we had Barton Cable for a while, and then they went out of business, and we didn't have cable again. And so I didn't get the privilege of watching horror movies on cable, but we did have a ton of mom and pop video stores and blockbusters around us, and so any chance that I could, or any excuse that I could find, we were getting. And plus, my mom was in the monster movies as well, so we were always getting Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th. I remember seeing The Howling at a very young age,
Nice.
and stuff like that. So it was always the zombies that got me the most, though. Like I think zombies are
Yeah.
like my favorite overall monster. I remember going over to my grandparents' house. They lived in the suburbs and they had cable. And I remember going over there as a family event to watch the premiere of Michael Jackson's Thriller.
Oh yeah.
The And I remember that scared the hell out of me at the time, because that was '82, maybe 83. So I would have been 7 or 8 years old maybe. And yeah, I remember uh, Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things was a very early zombie movie that really
Yeah.
got me. So, whatever I could pick up on TV or whatever we could pick up at the video store, but I didn't get the opportunity, the suburban experience of staying up late watching things on Skinamax and whatever else you could find on cable. So I missed out on that, but I found other avenues to acquire movies
Yeah.
and books and things of that nature.
No, yeah, because for me, one of the things, I mean, growing up, I mean, in the big family was that we were always watching something. My dad was real big on westerns.
Oh yeah.
I loved horror. We used to watch Kung Fu Theater. We used to watch, every come the weekend, it was like, I mean, back to back. But horror, man. I mean, that was always like my go to. The first film that I watched, they actually allowed me and my best friend. We're like 8 years old now. My dad was like, yeah, y'all can take the bus, go downtown, go to this theater.
Hmm.
And when you get off, you just cross the street, you catch the same bus back. And so, I mean, I was scared, nervous, but I was like, okay, well, it seems simple. And so we took the bus ran behind our house, like at the behind our house, like on I guess the street, right? It's like another house
Hmm.
behind us, but
Yeah.
we just jumped on it. It was the first movie I went to see at a theater was Shud. I don't know if you remember that one.
Yes, I do.
Yeah,
We got it on video though. I think it was
yeah,
one my mom rented from Blockbuster. Um, yeah, I remember that was big with my mom and the lady across the street and the kids across the street as well. Yeah, that was one of the big ones at the time.
yeah. Because that was my first one, man. So I mean, after that, it was like, okay, I wanted to go every weekend. But
Oh yeah,
it was,
oh yeah.
my dad was cool with it. My mom, not so much, man. But yeah, we still there's a meme that I saw on Facebook one day, and they're like, man, if only our parents knew how far we used to go on our bikes. And I'm like, yeah, because we used to ride them everywhere, man. I mean, we were like 3-4 hours away, and then coming back home.
Oh yeah, yeah. They don't do that anymore. I don't
No,
think.
no.
I would imagine most kids these days have never been more than 15 minutes away from their own house. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
especially on
our,
with no vehicle. Yeah, they don't
our
walk anymore.
our parents had no idea what we were getting
No.
up to half the time. They would just throw us out on the doorstep at 7 a.m. and you weren't allowed back until it was dark out.
Yeah.
And whatever you did, they didn't want to hear about it.
No, yeah, and if they did, then that's when we used to get one, man. Because I think like one time we were actually like racing home. It was me, my brother, and my neighbor, and man, we were late. But it was like 7:30. It was getting dark, and we're like hauling home, like without down the main street. We get
Yeah.
home, and first thing my mom's like, putting groceries away, and we're like, hey mom, and she was all like, where were you? And I was like, oh, we're like at the school. And she was like, really? Because I saw y'all going down, West Commerce, and we're like, holy crap. So man, like she came at us, man. I mean, my dad was always the one that would rescue us, but man,
Ah,
love her, man. I mean, but she was something else, man. I mean, oof. But yeah, I think I was more afraid of her than the horror movies, bro.
yeah. And I wonder if the era we grew up in had anything to do with it because we were at the end of the Cold War, right? And
Yeah.
so
Oh
we
yeah.
were still we were still living in the era where your face could melt off at any second and you'd have no warning. So,
Exactly.
like, how scary could a horror movie really be
I know. Yeah.
when that could happen? When like that was a real fear. So maybe that had something to do with it for us. Why so many kids growing up in the '80s were so into horror movies all the time.
Oh yeah, and I'll say this because actually a buddy of mine posted earlier how like the first time he saw Faces of Death, and I commented like, "Oh man, I mean, when I first saw it, I wasn't really shocked." I said because I grew up in, I mean, I'm in a Hispanic household, right? But we used to watch Telemundo and Univision,
Hmm.
and those Spanish stations had no censorship, bro. Like they used to show like everything, dude. And I mean, I'm talking about like we're eating lunch and people dead, dying, missing limbs, and we're like, what the heck?
Oh
So
my goodness.
yeah, it was just like in your face type stuff. So I was like, yeah, like after that, nothing really, nothing really shocked me, man. I was
That's
like,
a that's amazing too because you know I assume you were on the north side of the border picking them up from the south side, and so I'm
oh
on this. I'm on the south side of the Canadian border, and we would get like
yeah,
red, green, and ice hockey.
yeah, oh yeah,
So I guess Canadian TV is a little different from Mexican TV, but
oh yeah, man. We used to watch some crazy stuff, but
that's funny as hell. I
but
like
man,
that.
my bro, I appreciate you jumping on this first and foremost. I would love to bring you back on here, man, because I do have more questions. I just wanted to plug you in, let people know who you were, and of course what you're doing. For those that don't know, but Dark Illusions, FX.com, of course, is the website.
Yes.
Man, I'd love to bring you back on here, man. I mean,
Yeah,
hopefully this is
I'd
a
like to
thing.
be
And,
back.
and I've got, I'm gonna be ordering something because there's something that caught my attention on your website. So I'm gonna next time we jump on, maybe we'll do a live, video, and I'll wear that bad boy while we're talking, bro.
That'd be awesome, man.
Man, but I do appreciate you. Don't hang up yet, everybody out there, of course. Once again, Jason, thank you very much. Everybody else, this is
Thanks for having
sPidA
me.
Coming Soon podcast. Till next time, follow up.